So, I have two seemingly unrelated passions. First one is architecture. The second one is the power of sound. The first one is my medium of expression. The second one stems from a deeply held belief I have that the world as we know it is simply manifestations of vibrational frequency, and I mean that on every scale. This is one of the earliest images we have of the early universe. NASA researchers found that out of this chaos came an organizing pattern, one of the first organizing patterns to the plasma cloud. It was a low-frequency tone that rippled through the plasma cloud and set into motion the creation of the galaxies and the universe as we know it today. Before matter existed, the universe was already singing. On the opposite end of the scalar spectrum, string theory posits that at our most basic subatomic level, we're all composed of one-dimensional strings whose vibrational frequencies define the laws of physics. As humans, we're not outside of this system. We're interactive players in this process, and we're very well tuned to do it. The human ear enjoys 3 times more neural connections to the brain than does the eye. We can detect a vibrating molecule as low as 20 beats per second, or 20 hertz, all the way up to 20,000 hertz. That's an order of magnitude of 1,000 times, roughly 10 octaves of sound that you can detect. Compare that against the order of magnitude of visual sight, which is only 2, or roughly a single octave, which we know as Roy G. Biv. So as a designer, we create architectural spaces which are de facto instruments. They contain sound, they manipulate it, they can even create sound. So we're tasked with a very powerful tool for affecting human cognition. And it was this passion that drove me in 2012 to embark on an international research fellowship, seeking out buildings that manifested specific sonic phenomenon for the stated purpose of spiritual or transcendent experiences. I started with resonance, and that's sympathetic vibrations which create amplitude. And I don't know of a better pair of words than sympathetic vibrations. Our world could use more of it. For this, I traveled to the island of Malta in the Mediterranean, and specifically to a 5,000-year-old underground temple that was discovered under these houses in 1902. It's a 3-story temple carved out of solid limestone in the Bronze Age. And of particular interest to me was a space called the Oracle Room. Archaeologists believe that this was reserved for the shaman of this religion. The roof is painted in spiraling red paint, which they suspect might be musical notation that we can't decipher. But the reason the Oracle Room, we're having battery issues. There we go. The reason the Oracle Room is so special is because it's a perfect resonating chamber for a specific frequency, 110 hertz. What makes it a resonating chamber? The dimensions of the space are an exact multiple of the wavelength of that frequency. So as I stood in the space, and I apologize for the lack of video, the sensitivity of the site meant that they patted me down and I could enter with nothing. So as I stood in the space and began to sing, searching for that tone, as soon as I hit 110 hertz, I knew it because the space came alive. Sound suddenly surrounded you from every direction. It sounded like there were people singing with you. The intensity got so strong you could feel the vibration through your body. This is the tone of the hypogeum. So what's happening? Why does it do this? Like I said, when I start to sing, my voice travels, hits the wall, and bounces back in sync with my remaining voice. Now, constantly, sound waves are interfering with each other, and they usually muddy each other up. When 2 waves are in perfect sync like this, creates a natural form of amplification called constructive interference, or a standing wave. That's what created the effect that I experienced. So what? That's the sonic equivalent of an optical illusion, basically, right? And that's the exact question that a team of neuroscientists from UCLA asked in 2008 when they traveled to the hypogeum to study it. What they found was the brain, when exposed in the way the hypogeum does to that tone, experiences shifts in the prefrontal cortex and creates a functioning asymmetry within the brain. That's not dissimilar from the brain states of monks in meditation or transcendent experiences. And so archaeologists believe that there's a possibility the shaman of this religion were using this chamber as a literal gateway to the doors of perception. If there's one critique of the hypogeum, it's that as soon as you stop the sound, it dissipates. For this, we introduce reverberation. Reverberation can be considered the amount of time sound lingers in a space after the source sound is gone. And for this, I traveled to the Baptistry of St. John in Pisa. It's 2 doors down from the Leaning Tower. Millions of people walk by it every day, and very few know what it does. A typical space such as this might have a reverberation time of 1 to 2 seconds, but because of the architecture of the baptistry, it enjoys a reverberation time between 10 and 12 seconds. I'm about to play a video of a single vocalist standing in the center of the space, harmonizing a 3-tone chord. Try and decipher what sound is coming out of her mouth and what sound is coming from the architecture around her. So if we can couple that sort of a immersive reverberation with the tones of the hypogeum, we could create something powerful. But what's happening there? Why is that happening? If we take a look at the baptistry in both plan and section, the first thing you should notice is that in plan, it's a pair of concentric circles. And so as she starts to sing, her vocal energy first interacts with the inner colonnade and bounces straight back to her. If we lay this out on a timeline, we can start to map out the reflections of acoustics within the space. Some of her voice travels to the exterior wall before returning back to her. Slightly longer travel time, slightly longer reflection. Some of her voice gets trapped on the return trip between the outer wall and the colonnade, further extending that reverberation time. And this happens throughout the space, in all the nooks and crannies. The farthest traveling occurring heading straight up to the peak of the ceiling before returning back. Now keep in mind, between reflection 3 and 4, reflections 1, 2, and 3 are repeating the process over and over again. And it's this layering of sound that creates that extended reverberation time. As if that wasn't enough, a remodel to the building a few hundred years ago added a dome which encapsulated airspace, which acts as a resonating chamber, holding those sympathetic vibrations and then returning them to the space, even further extending that reverberation time. So now we've built a language of understanding on how to use architecture to make such a powerful sonic space. But how does one even begin to design that, right? Do you just start drawing circles or something? And so for me, I return to science and to sound. This is a physics experiment in Simatics, which is the study of sound traveling through a medium. This is hundreds of years old, the knowledge of this process. It's simply a steel plate mounted onto a frequency generator with salt or sand sitting atop it. As the experimenters cycle through higher and higher frequencies, you'll see that the sound reveals itself in formal arrangements. We were able to do this dozens, if not hundreds of times, and get out individual fingerprints, each unique like a snowflake for various tones. Keep in mind, these are two-dimensional representations of a three-dimensional process. And as we started to study them, I could decipher general rules to their organization. As frequency increases, so does the complexity of the pattern. You can see that the lowest frequency at the top left is much more basic than the highest frequency at the bottom right. Additionally, every cymatic pattern is symmetrical about an axis. And this shouldn't be surprising because if you think about sound, it's traveling in all directions at the same speed. And so being a branch of physics, it can be defined by math. And if it can be defined by math, it can be put into the computer. And so that's exactly what I did. I designed an algorithm in my 3D modeling software that allows me to recreate the cymatic process in real time based on frequency, wavelength, amplitude. And then I can tell the computer, identify the symmetrical axes, and instead of mirroring as in 2D, we start to think of orbiting for symmetry in 3 dimensions. This allows me to now visualize the spatial configurations of each of these unique tones and manipulate them in real time. I apologize for the lagging computer. It's pretty complex math, but it's a fascinating process. I can't get enough of it, actually. So this being said, instead of dozens or hundreds of 2D prints, I now had a process for iteratively creating dozens or hundreds of 3-dimensional spatial configurations. So I began to organize them based on frequency. Seeking frequency-based organizational patterns and thinking back to Pisa, I thought, why don't I start to group these things by harmonic frequencies? So these are 3D prints of a harmonic triad, a B-flat major to be specific. What I was surprised by was that the tones that have a harmonic audible relationship also have similar formal arrangements. You can almost imagine form A evolving into form B, evolving into form C. And here's the tones that created these. Here's an A minor in its creative tones. And my wife's favorite, the C major. So, as we start to envision these as inhabitable space, we know by finely tuning the dimensional quality of this, we can achieve the frequencies that we wish. And by organized, layered, spatial complexity, just like the Pisa Baptistry, we can create hyper-resonant and hyper-reverberant spaces, these ideal sound baths, if you will. So I'm now working with the team who's envisioning these on a variety of scales, from something small enough for 1 or 2 people to share some time in, to sonic exploratoriums large enough for 300 or 400 people. I'm also modeling more advanced mathematical processes through it, and it's opening new worlds that I had not even imagined, with powerful spatial and formal opportunities. And how can we use these spaces? Well, like I said, there's an entertainment aspect to this in a sonic exploratorium. These could also serve as immersive sonic therapy rooms for sonic immersion therapies that already exist for PTSD, depression, anxiety, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. These would also be powerful neuroscientific laboratories into cognitive and sensory neuroscience to further advance our understanding of the power of sound on the brain and body. But above all things, this started and will always be for me a chamber for sonic meditation and a pure temple of sound. Thank you.